this lesson, we'll discuss the class project and learn some useful tips to customize your render. Let's begin. We finished the example from class and rendered our animation as both a video file and an animated GIF. So what else is there left to do? While you might be happy with your render thus far, there's a lot of satisfaction that can be had from customizing the render to your own unique style. This could be something as simple as moving the camera's position, or as complicated as modeling new objects for your scene. We won't be going over every single change possible for the render in this lesson, as the possibilities are endless, but I'll walk you through a few simple changes you can make to your render to get your imagination going. Before we start making any changes though, let's get our file set up and ready to go. So first, make sure you're set to the layout workspace that you see here. Next, make sure that you have this left viewport set to the rendered mode, found here with this button on the far right. Okay, so now we're ready for a very important step, saving a new version of this file. We won't start making any changes to this file before we save a new class project version of it, because we want to make sure that we have the freedom to return to the original class version of the render if we need to. First, we simply want to save the file as it is now, to make sure that the original version is as up to date as possible. So we'll just go over here to File, and then choose Save. Now we need to create a new version of this file. So we'll go back up to File, and then choose Save As instead. Navigate to the same place as the original Blender file if it didn't put you there already. And then down here in this red bar, at the very beginning of your file name, put the words class project underscore, and then you can click off of it and you'll see that this word is no longer red. The red was there to let us know that we haven't changed the name yet, so if we saved it again with the same name, it's just going to save over the original. We do need to change the name. You also notice that the file name that you see down here is going to be different than yours, and that's because I had class example in front of mine just for class recording purposes. So yours should just say class project underscore starter file sci-fi manga underscore 01. With the name down here changed, go to Save As and then click this blue button. Okay, so now we have a new version of this file that it's jumped us right into. So now we're editing the class project version of the file, not the original version of it. And now we're ready to start learning some new tips and tricks. So what's the easiest change that we could make that would make the largest impact on the overall look of the image? Changing the colors. Changing the colors in our image can drastically shift the mood of the render, while being incredibly easy to adjust and customize to your own unique style. To do this, we're going to go over here to the compositing workspace found at the top. And then before we make any changes, we are going to render the image so that we can see it here on the right side. So you can go to Render, Render Image, or just hit F12. Okay, so now we're ready to make some changes. We'll be adding a single color ramp node to the far right of this node system to allow us to change the colors of the image. So let's zoom in over here on the far right. And then we're going to click and drag on these nodes here, including this reroute node, so this little dot, and then we're just going to move them to the right. Now we can hit Shift and A, go to Search, and then type in Color, and choose Color Ramp, found here. And then once you have the color ramp selected, just go over here and drop it right on top of this line once it turns white, and that'll automatically connect it for us. Now let's zoom in on this new node so we can see the settings we have. Now we're free to adjust any of the settings on this color ramp node to change the overall color of our render. One thing to note about this color changing process though, is this is going to make it look a bit less like a manga, as they were primarily printed on white or sepia toned paper. Don't let that stifle your creativity though, it's your render, do whatever you want. For my render, let's just add some wild colors. As always, feel free to choose your own colors for this step if you want to even do this step at all. So for the white, I'm going to change this to maybe a yellow color. And then for the black slider, I'll change this to maybe a dark purpley red color. And we can see right away that these changes have made a huge impact on the look of this image. You can also change the position of these sliders on this as well. So if you wanted more of any one color, you could slide this to the left or right and create a very stark look. Or if we wanted it to be a bit brighter, we could slide this to the left. We can also add new colors to this gradient, so we have more than just two to play with. So I'm going to drag this all the way over here to the right, and then I'll select this last slider here on the left. In my case, the dark reddish purple color, but for you it might be black still. And then we can hit this small plus sign button here found at the top. And that'll add a brand new slider here in the middle that we can adjust the position of as well as the color. So I'm going to select this middle slider here, go down to the color bar, and maybe I'll make this more of an orange color, somewhere between the two that I have now. Now that I have the color changed, I can also change the position of it. So if I slide it more to the left, I'll see a bit less of it. So now if I zoom in on my image here, I can see that I have yellow on the highlights, orange on these midtones, and then this deep sort of wine purple color for the shadows. And you could continue adding more and more colors here just by selecting one of your sliders and then hitting the plus sign to add a new color. And you could change this to something even crazier like bright green and see how that affects your image. In my case, I don't think that particularly helped the look of this image. I can just select that slider and then hit the minus sign to remove it. These colors are a bit wild, but I'll leave them there for the rest of this lesson. As I mentioned before, feel free to make any changes you like, but you don't have to go as crazy as I did. If you'd prefer a more traditional look, you could try using shades of tan to make your render look like it's on a sepia paper rather than a bright white paper. So that would still allow you to experiment with this color adjustments without making it look completely wild like mine is. For our next change, let's head back to the layout workspace found here at the top left. We'll now notice over here on the left side that we can see this orange color that I changed mine to in the compositing workflow. If you also changed your colors, but you don't see those colors reflected here on the layout workspace, you might need to go up here to this drop down here next to the rendered button that we turned on before. And then at the very bottom of these settings, make sure you have the compositor set to camera. If you don't see your colors, it might be set to disabled, which means that you wouldn't be seeing any of the compositing effects, including the paper textures and the value adjustments we made in the compositing workflow. So you'll want to have yours set to camera. Okay, so another easy change that we could make is simply moving the position of the light in the scene. There's only one light in our scene, so it should be pretty easy to move it around and get a completely different look for our render. Over here in the right viewport, in the camera and lights collection, if we twirl this open, we'll see an object here just called light. And now with this light selected, in our right viewport, we can zoom out a bit, select our move tool found here, and then decide to move this light wherever we'd like. Just as an example, I'm going to move my light down here. So I can just click and drag this, and we can see over here on the left viewport that our light is changing the look of the scene pretty dramatically. It's really changing the way the shadows affect the scene, as well as where all of our highlights are. So if I move this light up or down, we can see that we're seeing more light on the top surfaces, or if I move it below, we're getting shadows that go straight up into the air. For my example, I'll move it back up a little bit, so they're kind of coming horizontally out of this. Again, this is just an example. I understand that this might not be a look that everybody enjoys. I'm just doing this to show you what you could do. After you've moved the main light in the scene, which is the only light, you could also hit Shift and D to create a duplicate of this light so you have two lights to play with. So if I wanted to do that for this scene, I might zoom out a bit, hit Shift and D over here in the right viewport to make a duplicate, and then maybe I'll move mine down here, somewhere lower than the original light and on this side of the bridge, so I can fill in a lot of those shadows. And then I could just fine tune the position of this light wherever I'd like to get the type of shadows and the illumination that I'd like. So maybe right here looks good for mine. Okay, so now that we've adjusted our lighting as well as the colors, let's discuss the changes that we can make to the grease pencil drawings. Obviously, you always have the option to simply add more wires or cracks to your walls. These can all help detail the world further and make it look even more unique. However, you also have the option to add completely new objects to your world just by drawing them. This largely will depend on how comfortable you are at drawing objects from scratch, but it can add a lot of fun details to an already dense world. As a quick example, let's scribble a really simple character down in this hole on the wall at the bottom right. First, we'll need to create and set up the grease pencil object. So first, go over here to the collection on the right side called Grease Pencil, and make sure you click this white folder here to make this the active collection. Now in the right viewport, we can hit Shift and A, go down to Grease Pencil, and choose Blank. Let's quickly rename this. So we're just going to have it named gpencil_character, and then hit Enter. And then in either of these viewports, it doesn't matter which, we're going to switch from the object mode to the draw mode instead. And now over here in our left viewport, we're going to hold Shift and then right click to place our 3D cursor somewhere on the floor here inside this hole. So for my example, I'm going to place it right around where this crack is on the wall. So I'll just hold Shift and then right click to place that. Wherever you place this 3D cursor is where the feet of your character will be standing. So keep that in mind. And now over here in the right viewport, we can switch from the surface mode to the 3D cursor mode instead. And then we'll switch from side to front instead. All right, so we have everything set up and we're ready to draw. Our goal here is to draw a character for your scene. It could be a human, a robot, a creature, anything you want really. Do keep the scale of your character in mind when drawing though. We have a general sense of human scale thanks to the ladders placed in our scene. So if you want to create a human character, think about them using the ladders in this scene as well as the perspective of your drawing. A robot or some other creature could be any size you want though. They don't need to conform to the world that they inhabit. As a really quick and loose example, I'm going to draw just a simplified human shape here, looking over the drop off on the edge. So we'll be standing here, looking down over the cliff. So we can just zoom in here and begin drawing. Feel free to follow along with the shapes that I'm drawing, but again, this is just going to be a really loose and scribbly human shape, so feel free to do much better than I'm doing. Okay, so my perfect little masterpiece is done. And as you can see, it really doesn't take a whole lot of detail here to just imply some life in this world. So if I zoom out here, you can see my drawing gets a lot tinier and the individual little details and pen strokes don't really matter as much. You can see just how tiny this person is within the world. So you really don't need to have perfect drawings here. They can be loose and scribbly and just kind of imply a human shape and you'll get along fine. This also really helps imply the massive scale of this world. We can see that if this is a normal human person, that this world is gigantic. It's really, really big, which can help really set a perspective for this world. You can repeat this process however many times that you like and wherever you'd like in your world. I'm really excited to see what you add. For now though, I'm going to leave draw mode so that we can proceed with the rest of the lesson. So we'll just go up here and then click draw mode and then switch back to object mode. Our next change is to the animation of the camera or even the lights. A really simple way to make the animation look different is to simply change the movement of the camera. This could mean changing the directions that it moves or how quickly it moves. As a really rough example of how you could do this, let's make our camera move up and to the left rather than down and to the right. Obviously, this is a very minor difference, but it'll just show you how you could update your camera. So first, we'll select the camera from over here on the right side. We're going to choose Animated Camera. Now down here on the timeline, we're going to go to frame 90, which is where our middle keyframe is sitting. And then over here in our right viewport, we can zoom into our camera. And then we're just going to move our camera up and to the left beyond the original position that it starts at on frame 0. So if you want to get an idea of roughly where it starts, you can drag this back to frame 0 and then pay attention to roughly where it's sitting right now. Now we can move it back to frame 90, and then we're just going to move our camera to where it was before and then move it up a little bit past that instead. So maybe up to here. You're going to have to guess the position at first, but we can always adjust it later. Once you've found the new position for your camera, hover your mouse over here on the right viewport and then hit I on your keyboard to update the keyframes. This will place a new keyframe directly on top of the old one, replacing it. And now we can play our new animation to see if we like the new movement. We can do that just by going down here and hitting the play button. And now we can see that the animation is technically different, albeit very similar. Obviously, if you were going to make a change for your animation, you'd probably want to do something a little bit more exciting than this. But again, that's totally up to you. Do whatever you'd like, but also do keep in mind that you don't want your camera flying all over the scene, as it's going to expose some different issues within the world. If you're happy with the position of your camera, we can just pause this animation. Another thing that I mentioned was that you could animate your lights. This can be a fun way to add life to the scene that is either in addition to the camera movements or instead of them. This means that you could remove all the keyframes from your camera so it remains completely still, and then animate only the lights in the scene to give a sense of movement. We're going to leave the camera animated for this example, but we can still add some light animations. We already understand the process of animating movements for objects like we did with the camera, so this time let's animate the brightness of the light to try out something new. So your first step is to select the light that you want to animate. In my case, I'm going to animate the duplicated light, the one that's providing most of the illumination for here on the front. Now move your playhead down here on the timeline to frame 0, and then over here with your light still selected, we can go down to the Object Data Properties tab. In this case, it looks like a little green light bulb. So now that we can see the light's parameters that we can adjust, let's adjust the power value to change the brightness. First, we're going to place a keyframe without making any adjustments on frame 0. To do this, we need to go over here and click on this white dot next to the power value. That'll turn it into a white diamond, and it'll also make the numbers here yellow. Before we go too much further, I did want to preemptively answer a question that you might have. You'll notice that I didn't mention animating the colors of the lights. Unfortunately, I didn't mention this because it isn't really possible given the way that we've created our material. The material in our scene has been filtered through a shader to RGB node in order to capture the strong contrast and sharp lines of our manga reference. This node forces all lighting to appear the color of the gradient that we set in this material. In our case, just black and white. Due to this limitation, the only thing that we'll be able to affect is the brightness of our light, but not the color as it's being overridden by that color ramp node. This limitation would be true even if we didn't have this bright orange color in my case over top of the entire image, as that compositing node also has no effect on the way the material interprets lighting. So even if this was still black and white and we wanted to change the color here, you wouldn't really notice any difference. It would still look black and white. So with that out of the way, now let's move down here to frame 45. Now we're going to make the light dim every 3 seconds, meaning that it'll happen twice during the duration of this animation. So our first step is over here in the power. We're just going to change the very first number here from 4 down to 2 instead. So we're going to halve this number. After you've changed this number, you'll notice that it's orange and that this diamond over here is now hollow. So all you need to do is place a keyframe here by clicking on this hollow diamond to turn it white and then make this number here yellow. The values for these lights might seem incredibly high, but it's just the brightness that we needed for a world of this scale and to achieve the effect that we're trying to recreate. So now we'll notice if we go down here and drag our playhead back and forth, that from frame 0 to frame 45, this light dims in brightness. We can notice that here on the front of the bridge. So if we look at this area here, it's pretty obvious that it's brighter here and it's dimmer here. So now we have the basics of this animation set up. So now we can just copy these keyframes for the length of the animation to make it repeat. So our first step is to go down here and drag select over both of these keyframes from 0 and 45. Now hit Control and C to copy these keyframes. Then we'll go over here to frame 90, which is right in the middle, and then hit Control and V to paste these keyframes. And now we can drag select over frame 0 again. So we're just selecting just this keyframe, so only the one over here. Hit Control and C to copy, and then go over to frame 180 and hit Control V to paste that keyframe. And that's it for the light animation. We now have a subtle pulsing animation for the light in our scene to add to the movement already created by the camera animation. We can see a quick example of that down here if we hit the play button. Now we can see that as our camera moves back and forth in the scene, we also have a subtle pulsing of that light, just adding a little bit more life to the world. The last tip I have for you regards the models in the scene. We didn't cover any modeling in this class, but that doesn't mean that you can't make changes to it on your own. Modeling is probably the most involved change that you can make to your world, but it can be incredibly satisfying to shape the world to your own vision. While we won't be discussing modeling anything from scratch in this lesson, I can give you a few tips on how you could use the models already present in the world to change the look of your render. The first change is to simply remove models from the scene. If there's a model that you'd rather not have present in your image, we can just hide it. For this example, let's hide the ladder down here on the side of these vertical pipes. All we need to do is select the model here in the viewport, and then over here on the right side, we're going to twirl open the right wall collection because that's where this model lives. And now if we scroll down this list, we'll see here we have ladder 02 selected. To hide this model from the render, we simply need to click on this eyeball as well as this camera icon here. If you only hide it with the eyeball, you won't see it in this viewport render over here, but it will still show up in the render. And if you only hide this render icon here and not the eyeball, you'll see it in the viewport, but it won't show up in the render. So it's kind of confusing both ways. So generally when you're hiding things like this, usually you're going to hide both of these options. This process of hiding objects is possible with literally every object in the scene. Some objects are a bit more important than others based on what they obscure or attach to, but don't let that stop you from experimenting. One thing to note, however, is you'll need to keep in mind that hiding a model doesn't hide the grease pencil drawings on top of it, as they're separate objects. So if I selected this object here and hit it, you'll notice that all the drawings that I had on top of it still exist. And that's because these drawings and the objects exist separately from each other. So I'm going to go over here and turn this back on. You'll need to either erase the grease pencil drawings that were on the object or turn off the grease pencil layer corresponding to those lines if you want to split up your drawing that way. As a quick example, if I went down here to my grease pencil wires object, I could go down to these layers and turn off the visibility for any one of them. So if I wanted to hide all the wires here on these columns, because maybe I'm planning on removing the columns from my class project render, I could just click on this eyeball here, and that will remove all of these wires just found on the columns. This would only be possible though, if you remembered to split up your drawings into different layers. For now, I'm going to turn these back on. Alright, so we've learned how to remove an object from our scene, but how do we add them? The easiest way to add a new object would be using the duplicate function. This would allow us to select either one object or a few at the same time, and then make an exact copy of them to place somewhere else in the world. We'll be able to craft new focal points with this method, or simply add more detail to the world to make it more dense. First, you'll need to decide the object or objects that you want to duplicate. I'll continue using these vertical pipes here as my example. If you only wanted to duplicate a single object, simply click it here in the left viewport, or over here in the right viewport. If you wanted to duplicate this entire group of objects though, so this pipe cover as well as the two pipes below it, I would need to select all three of them at the same time. To do this, we'll just hold down Shift before selecting, and then click on the new object, and then click on the last object here. So we can see here, now I have all three of these objects selected. So I can Control Z that. Holding Shift enables us to keep our previously selected objects while we continue to select new objects. Okay, so now that you have your desired object selected, you can just hit Shift and D at the same time to begin duplicating these objects. Before you left click to place this new duplicate, we do have a few options. You can change which axis this new duplicated object moves along by simply pressing the corresponding axis on your keyboard. So if you wanted to move it only up and down when you're duplicating it, you can hit Z so that it stays on the Z axis when you move the duplicate, or you could hit X to move it this way, or Y to move it this direction. In my case, Y makes the most sense because it keeps it attached to the wall. This obviously isn't mandatory, but it can help you keep an object firmly planted on the wall if you want to make sure that your duplicate remains on the same original plane. So now I'm just going to find a place to move this to initially. Somewhere back here looks fine. Then we can zoom our camera out here to get a better view of where it actually appears. And then we can adjust this position. Maybe in this case, I'll slide it down. So let's zoom in here and just find a spot that I like for this on the wall. So maybe somewhere around here would be fine. At this point, feel free to move, rotate, scale, do really anything you want to these objects to make them fit better in the scene that you want to craft. For this example, now that I've moved it back in space, maybe I want to make it much larger. So I can hit S on my keyboard to scale it up larger, and then maybe move it away from the wall, and then slide it back down. As another quick example, we could zoom out here, and we could select this large pipe, hit Shift and D, then hit X to move it this direction. Now we can hit R and Z to make sure that it only rotates on the Z direction. And then we'll rotate it around somewhere here maybe. We can move it up. And then we could also slide it back in space. And now if we look at it over here on our camera view, we can adjust the position to match where we want it. And then feel free to adjust it further within this view using your rotate or your scale to get the look that you want. You could also just keep making more duplicates to fill out this area a bit more. So you can see it's really easy to start making some simple changes here to really change the look of the overall image. The possibilities really are endless, even with only using the models that already exist in the scene. Obviously, don't let that stop you though from making brand new models of your own to detail the world. At this point, I hope you can appreciate just how much customization is possible within the scene, even after we've finished the original example from class. I'm really excited to see where your creativity takes you. In the very last lesson, we'll end the class with some conclusions and farewells. I'll see you there.